Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar this morning. This is Mallory Ray. I'm so happy to be hosting for the University of Missouri. We have just a couple of housekeeping items this morning. As you're joining us, we do expect a large number of people across the multi-state region. Please make sure your mics are muted. There will be a little bit of time for Q&A at the end of the presentation, but we encourage everyone who has a question to please use the chat box within Zoom. You can find this at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There's that chat box. Enter your questions there. We'll answer a few of those at the end, and all the rest of them we'll collect. We'll have our presenters respond to them, and we will email out those answers along with the recording of the webinar to everyone who's registered. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dan.
Good morning, everybody. Are we ready to roll?
We're ready.
Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to the webinar this morning. We're calling it Linking Extension and Community Disaster Response and the 2020 River Flooding Forecast, specifically focusing on the Missouri River. And this webinar is a function of the Heartland Extension Disaster Education Network, which is a project funded for 2 years through a USDA NEFA grant. And our team members with the project are from the 4 states that you see displayed across the bottom of the screen here, the 4 universities. And there's the listing of our team members. I would draw attention to 2 folks down at the bottom of the list that are contractors, contracted with us for the project. Susan Tharp and Frank Weideman. They are both retired University of Missouri Extension personnel. Susan will be doing our evaluation work with the project, and Frank has years and years of field experience working as an engineer and also dealing with the environmental management side of things. The goals of the Heartland EDEN project are to create an extension network within the region for sharing and the creation of emergency management education resources. Although we're primarily focusing today on flood and flood response type activities, the project is broader than that. It's all natural disasters and emergency type situations that we're interested in addressing. We're going to try to do this through our primary objectives of inventorying the current resources that we have available within Extension, identifying gaps within those resources, and then fill those gaps with digital or printed media. Another one of our goals is to build resilience throughout our rural and agricultural communities. You know, whether you're a rural or an urban setting, when we have disasters, we have very specified responses that we need to respond to things, plans that we need to develop, and mitigation efforts. This particular project, we've really chosen to focus on the rural population and the agricultural communities, although some of the materials will be applicable to the more urban setting. We're going to build this resilience by providing training for extension educators, encouraging extension personnel to get involved in disaster planning, mitigation, and response, and ultimately enhance the client's access to planning, mitigation, and recovery resources. So shifting gears just a little bit from the overview of the project to what we want to try to accomplish today, we wanted to introduce the Heartland Extension Disaster Education Network to everybody. So welcome. Thank you for participating and being a part of our network. That's our second bullet there, is expanding the network, and by your involvement, we're tagging that activity that we wanted to do. We wanted to provide an overview and help you all with the formal understanding of a structured response system in the United States, and then provide direction to resources that you may need and overall assist in your preparedness for response to disaster situations. So our objectives for today, our agenda for today, we've got really three primary presenters going to share their technical expertise with us. Those are Doug Cluck from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Office in Kansas City, Connie Burnham, the University of Missouri, and Frank Weideman, our consultant and emergency management expert. And we would ask that if you have questions, you type those into the chat box or hold them till the end of the webinar. We will have time probably at the end of the webinar for just a few questions. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Doug. Doug is the Central Region Climate Services Director for NOAA out of the Kansas City office, out of the National Center for Environmental Information. So with that, we'll move on to Doug.
All right, first of all, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right, second of all, can you see the big screen or the presentation?
Yes,
Yes.
we can.
All right, good. I'm going to have to talk kind of quickly because there's a lot of material to go through in a short period of time. Believe it or not, there's a lot of interest in flooding this year for some reason, especially in the Missouri and upper Midwest. I say that sort of tongue-in-cheek in a way. We're approaching the anniversary of the bomb cyclone, massive melt, the massive flood, all that kind of stuff in just a couple of weeks, or less than 2 weeks probably is when that began last year. So what I'm going to do is give you a little summary of what conditions are this year. If I had more time, I'd show you what it was like last year as a comparison. But I'll just tell you, it was a lot colder last year, and you can look at this departure from normal temperatures. This is from the High Plains Regional Climate Center out of Lincoln. This is one of their maps, more or less for the Missouri Basin. And wherever you see yellow and orange, we're looking at the left, by the way, the left image there. Wherever you see kind of yellowish or orangish or red even, those are above normal temperatures for the last 90 days or so. So we have been much more mild than we were last year. Now, we didn't start getting super cold until after probably January 15th or so last year. Nonetheless, it's been a much more mild and above normal, to be honest, temperature regime for us this winter. On the right is an image of the percent of normal precipitation for pretty much the same region, the Missouri Basin. Wherever you see greens to purple, that's above normal precipitation. Obviously, South Dakota is not a lucky place to be in the last few years. They've just had the brunt of precipitation. It continues to be wet, overly wet up there. And of course, we went in fall, we went in very, very, very wet. North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, portions of northern Nebraska, Iowa. Anyway, all those places froze solid, so nothing happened. So all that water is still stored up there. You'll see that in a minute. Here's the last 30 days, pretty much the same type of images. On the left is temperature. Again, mostly warm over the basin except for the high mountains, Wyoming, Colorado. And then precipitation below normal, eastern Nebraska, most of Iowa, a little bit above normal, where actually they needed a little bit of precipitation in southern Kansas there. They were getting sort of droughty, if you will. Hard to believe, I know, but they were. And then the mountains also have since basically the beginning of February picked up quite a bit of snowfall actually. So here's more or less current stream flow versus historical average for this time of year. Wherever you see a black or blue or even light blue, that's above normal stream flow. So as of right now, we're seeing, and all those ones without any color at all, they're frozen in, so we're not getting any readings out of there. But wherever you see blacks and blues, those are above normal stream flows for this time of year, not surprisingly. Look at snow, look at sort of the snow in the mountains. The image on the left is a more recent version of that, and we're starting to pump up the values, if you will, in snow water equivalent. That means the amount of water in the snowpack at this time of year. As of February 1st, we were pretty close to normal. Those values up there, if you look on the right there, were around right around 100. So right around 100%, which is normal. These are going above that, so we're up 120, 130 in a couple places. Not that that's worrisome. That's we can handle that. The reservoir system, the core can handle that kind of thing. This is just a more blown up this is actually comparing last year at this time, more or less, to what's happening now. And as you can see, we're wetter in the mountains than we were last year. However, now I didn't do the comparison here. I have another slide for that, but the snowpack, and this is a couple of days old, but anyway, the snowpack is much, much less. If you remember last year at this time, how far south that snowpack went into Nebraska and even Iowa and all those places, we had a lot more water on the ground, frozen on the ground at this time last year. So that's good. It's not necessarily good for eastern South Dakota, as anybody who's up there knows. It's going to be a bad year, and we'll get to that. Here's soil moisture rankings, and again, wherever it's green, you're sort of above normal and really saturated to our north, Montana to northern Nebraska, to the Dakotas and all that business. A little drier, but not dry. For the sort of 4 states that are on this call. All things to be aware of. Soil moisture is something that doesn't go away once it freezes in the fall. So fall is really important, whether it's wet or dry, to what's going to happen or what could happen in the spring. So something we're worried about. We call it memory in the system, actually. I just threw this on here. This is the 7-day outlook for precipitation, all 7 days accumulated. So the next 7 days through the 5th or so of March. Yeah, so what this is saying is that the very southern part of the Missouri Basin anyway is going to get some decent rain, likely. That looks like that's going to start maybe Sunday, Monday, that kind of time frame into Tuesday. It looks like the Ohio Basin is really under the gun, to be honest with you, on this particular graphic. Some high-level snow is off to our west, which is not unusual. Here's the week 2 temperature and precipitation outlook. These are probabilities, but generally what this is saying to us is that the whole basin for week 2, which is the 5th through the 11th, more or less, of March, is relatively, the probability of warmer than normal temperatures is higher than it normally is. And that image on the right shows us that pretty much our chances for precipitation during that period is below normal, which is okay. It's okay for this time of year not to get a lot of precipitation. And this is sort of that period where last year we had the bomb cyclone. What else do I want to say about this? Oh, well, I was just simply going to say March, this weekend we're supposed to be 65 degrees both Saturday and Sunday here in Kansas City, which means to me, March is coming in like a lamb. So we'll see what happens with March as we go out. Here's the March outlook, the entire month outlook from the Climate Prediction Center. And they're showing the lower basin, again, our 4 states, I guess you could say, Nebraska, Iowa, Missouri, Kansas. There's a slight chance for below normal temperatures during that period. And the probabilities enhanced, I guess you could say, slightly. And then the precipitation, really, there's not a lot of, except for the lower basin, Iowa, Missouri, eastern Nebraska, Kansas, there's an increased chance or probability of below normal precipitation for the month of March as well. This will be updated. This map will be updated on probably next Monday. Yeah, probably next Monday. So we'll see what's changed, if anything, in their forecasts. It gets updated twice a month. And then this is the March, April, May temperature precipitation outlook. So temperature on the left, precipitation on the right. I should also explain to you, whenever you see an EEC, that means equal chances of above, below, or near normal. It's not really saying it's going to be dry or wet, but it does say that the forecasts don't really show us a direction very well on which way it's going to go. The cooler, bluer temperature is slight enhancement for below normal temperatures up there in the upper basin of, so in Montana and the Dakotas, western Dakotas. But for the most part, temperatures for that period at the moment, equal chances of being above, below, or near normal. Precipitation, unfortunately, shows a propensity to be leaning to wet across most of the basin. Now, it's not a strong bullseye or probability, but it's there for March, April, May. And we really don't want to see normal precipitation or above, certainly, due to the saturated soils and everything else. We just don't want to see that. Just jumping ahead a month, April, May, June, I'll say a similar outlook for those 3 months, and then jumping ahead again, May, June, July. Unfortunately, that precipitation probability enhancement sticks around throughout that whole period. And temperatures, again, are sort of, as they say, EC, which means equal chances of all three categories, above, near normal, and below. Moving on. Here's the part you probably really wanted to see, but I'll get to the Missouri Basin specifically in just a moment. This is the Mississippi-wide outlook for flooding, and there currently is about 30% of the 1,500 forecast locations in the Mississippi Basin are likely to flood this year. So 30%, that's above normal. Particular concern are the Red River of the North, James River, Big Sioux River, both in eastern South Dakota, Upper Missouri River, Mississippi River, and Lower Missouri River. We're all looking at, all watching those closely. The color scheme there pretty much is purple is major flooding, red is moderate flooding, and orange is minor flooding, and that's all greater than 50% chance of that happening based on that color that you see. Here's the Missouri Basin, and those with a greater than 50% chance of major flooding include the James, Vermilion, and Big Sioux. Well, that's eastern South Dakota. All that runs into the Missouri unimpeded, by the way, unimpeded by any dam system. So that's gonna melt off, and the Corps has to deal. Well, Corps does have to deal with that, but they're not capturing any of that water behind their dam, their last dam, Gavin's Point. So that's all free flow stuff. Just want to point that out. And then moderate flooding expected, James River, North Dakota, Little Sioux River, South Dakota, Grand River, Platte River, Missouri. Several of the smaller tributaries, eastern Kansas, across the state of Missouri. So you can see the zones there where they're calling for moderate flooding, that red, and of course orange is minor flooding. And this is all due to, and this is an outlook, by the way, for March, April, May. Part of this is an every year occurrence due to just heavy spring rain and the propensity for some places to be more flood prone than others. Another part of it, of course, is all the water that's going to be coming down the Missouri and some of the tributaries. And they're trying to, this is taking into account all the soil moisture and everything else. So yeah, I think that's about it. Here's the outlook summary. And this is taken from Kevin Lau, and I got to make sure I give him full credit for this. He's with the River Forecast Center in Missouri Basin. The setup is relatively grim, as we mentioned, saturated soils, eastern Dakotas, widespread flooding, eastern part of the Missouri Basin is assured. mountain snowpack above average, not concerning yet. We still have a month and a half at least to go to add to that snowpack. So we'll see how it averages out at the end, because that's another additive we have to deal with all this kind of stuff. Frozen ground is not nearly as bad as it was last year. The mild winters helped, as we talked about. River ice also is not as big an issue as it was last year. And then I just sent a message out to my email list advertising this spring outlook. And in the chat portion of this presentation, or of this, what are we calling this, webinar or whatever, you can find this URL, but there is probably a more expansive spring flood outlook going to be given today. It says tomorrow, but it's really today, and March 12th again, at this location, this go-to webinar. You can actually register and go listen to it. It's at 2:30 today. And in 2 weeks, that's March 12th, right? 2 weeks from today is, yeah. In 2 weeks from today, they'll do it again. So just want to advertise that a little bit, and then say thanks. So I'll go back in case there's anything else you want to try and copy that down, but it's in the chat part of this presentation as well. The last thing I want to say is that we do run a monthly, no matter if it's wet or dry, we do a monthly sort of climate summary and outlook, similar to what I just went through here, but a lot more in depth for the entire north central part of the US every single month on the third Thursday. A lot of you may know about that. If you don't, you can always write me, and I will make sure I can put you on my list if that kind of information is of interest to you. You can sign up for the webinar, or general sort of NOAA regional, if you will, climate information. Just send me an email, say, hey, I want to be on your list. You can always take yourself off by saying, hey, get me off as well. So either way, anyway, I'm done. I'll be quiet. I've probably taken too much time.
Thank you so much, Doug. And if you'll stop your screen share, we'll go back to the other presentation. Stop
share. There we go. Did I do it?
You sure did. Thank you.
All right, Doug, really appreciate you being able to make time to come on and give us the whirlwind overview of the projections for this spring. At this point, we'd like to shift our focus a little bit. Connie Burnham and Frank Weideman are going to walk us through some of the logistics of how you, as a county extension-based person, can be more fully engaged and actively involved in the formal emergency management structure. Connie Burnham is here at the University of Missouri with extension programs. She's our emergency management coordinator, has over 20 years of disaster response and planning. Frank Weideman, as I already mentioned, is a retired agricultural engineer from University Extension. Frank has over 40 years in the field working with disaster management, recovery, and planning. And at this point, we'll move on to Connie. Thank you.
Good morning. This is Connie Burnham, and I'm thrilled that we have so many people that registered and have joined the webinar. Before we begin, I have a couple things I want to point out. First of all, this slide has 2 links. One goes to our Heartland EDEN website, and thanks to Jason, who worked very, very hard on getting this up. And as we process through this whole program, there'll be more and more things that'll be posted to that website. The EDEN website is, and many of you, if you've used the EDEN website before, might have a different URL. It is now being taken care of through Purdue instead of through LSU. So this is a new website, so that if you want to, go into that. But this is the mothership of the Heartland EDEN, or any of our programs that we have at our universities. EDEN became an organization as a result of the 1993 Midwest floods. So what we've experienced through the years with flooding is exactly why EDEN was put together. And I'm not going to belabor all that point. You can do a little bit of checking or become more familiar with it as you work with it. But please check that out, because we, Missouri, and all of us that are on this project have resources that we have parked in that website. A couple other things. I want my slides have a lot of information on them because I'm kind of using it as a training booklet for you. When you get this, these slides and you can download it, go to the notes option, and there's a lot of notes that I put. I put links to information. I have links to some courses that you might take, and so therefore, you'll have a lot more information once you know. While we're doing this presentation, if you don't know the emergency management system and you're trying to participate in it at whatever level you are, emergency management won't know what to do with you. They'll say, you know nothing about the system, so what can you offer us? So it is very, very vital that as many of you are assigned to working part-time or have some role in emergency management, that you understand the system. And so it's going to be a very quick overview because there's a lot to it, but just enough information for you at least to get started. So the first thing that I think it was either 78 or 79, before many of you even existed, the FEMA was established, and it was under President Carter, and we operated through a system that was set up under FEMA until 2011. And at that point, they decided to do kind of an overhaul of the system and put together this concept of including the whole community. What we've done through the years is gotten to rely more and more and more on the feds to come in and fix anything and pay for anything that has been destroyed through disasters. And it finally has gotten to the point that it's like, there's only so much money for this. It's our federal tax dollar, but it's still, there's just a certain amount. So we're going back to what, we probably did several decades ago into our grandparents' time period, or maybe even grandparents for sure, is that, you took care of more of the stuff yourself, that everybody had a shared responsibility. And that's what this whole community concept is. It's the basis of FEMA's emergency management program. It's the fundamental approach that is used to emergency management. It's used to assess what are the needs of a community, and then how do we organize our communities and strengthen what assets or capabilities or capacities that we might have. So and it includes all of us as stakeholders, including just me as a citizen, you as a citizen, us as extension, wherever we are, we are included in this. The National Incident Management System is a component of the whole community. It provides guidance. It provides a common nationwide approach to manage all our threats and hazards. So it's all hazard planning and response and recovery and whatever. It encompasses everything. It applies to all incidents. Doesn't make any difference what the cause is, where the location is, how complex it is. It is still applicable to that incident. It's more than just the incident command system. Many of you have heard of that or know that or have had training in it, but NIMS is more than that. It's also used in emergency operations centers, and it's also explaining the relationship between incident command, emergency operations centers, and senior leadership policy groups. We don't usually think about, what our elected officials, what the role they play, but they play a heavy role in this. They're the ones who set policy many times. So, we may think that somebody else, that the emergency management director is in charge of something or the incident commander is, but that's really not the case. It's government as well. So I'm going to give you some really basic information about the system. First of all, it's a bottom-up approach. So all disasters start at the local level and handled by local stakeholders. When there's an accident, who goes? Police. There's a fire, who goes? Fire departments. So it's just relying upon the existing capabilities that we have within a community, but it's inclusive of all organizations. So if anybody is needed on the local level, then they call them up and say, hey, I need some help from you. It covers all hazards. And again, there's 3 different categories: natural, technological, and human caused. The natural ones are natural events that threaten lives, property, and other assets, often are predicted. So what Doug was talking about just a few minutes ago, yeah, there's an outlook there that is telling us what we might anticipate. It also tends to occur repeatedly in the same geographical location. It's either weather patterns or physical characteristics. Yeah, that's what rivers are. And so we, get tornadoes. And for the 4 states that are included in this, I think probably flooding and tornadoes are our biggest issues, and that fits into that category right there. And so these are the ones that I took out of the whole list, and the rest of the list, the whole list is in the notes section, but this is what probably in the Midwest that we are involved in. And there's one about space weather that I thought was pretty interesting. And it's about, what happens up there can possibly affect the Earth and the rest of the solar system. And it says, at its worst, it can even damage satellites and cause electrical blackouts on Earth. So, I mean, that's everybody, and if that would happen, that would be a pretty impressive thing and something that would take a lot to recover from. Technological hazards are, if there's a failure of them, accidents, failure to store properly or transport. You see 18-wheelers on the road all the time, Here's a full list of those that affect the Midwest. As a matter of fact, this is the entire list that affects across the nation. And you can pick out which ones affect you or your area maybe the most. When we talk about, dam failures and that sort of thing, these are really, really hard things to overcome, but certainly something that has to be handled if something happens. And this usually is not handled just on the local level. Human-caused hazards. These are intentional actions of an adversary, and so we can look at chemical, biological, or cyber incidents. And here's the full list of that. Active shooter. If you haven't taken any training on this, you need to. And I'll just leave it at that because we're, you all know how important it is to be prepared for that. When we look at like the cyber attacks against data, I mean, this is happening. There's probably not a lot of reports of it because nobody really wants to say that, but there's a lot of organizations or companies that are being blackmailed. They capture your data and say, well, we'll let it go for this price. If it's against the infrastructure, think about the infrastructure. It all runs on, a power source. And if that is attacked, that is one of the things that we would really, really, we wouldn't be talking right now. You wouldn't be hearing my voice because we wouldn't have the power to run it. Politically motivated attacks, goodness, that's been going on probably for years and years and years, but it's gotten pretty grim, the last few years and things like that. So again, those are the sort of things that can really affect what emergency management is really looking at. And that is one of the things that you really need to understand is that all of these things that are listed are something that your local emergency managers and your communities and on the state level and on the federal level have to take in consideration when they are looking at what can they handle and what can't they handle and what do they need to be prepared for. So this is not just a list that says, hey, it's somebody else's, it's all of ours. And when they are working on these plans, that's what they're working on, from, because they do an assessment and find out what their community is concerned about and work on building those capabilities. So how was it organized? So the reason I'm telling you this is that some places are still using the 4 phases of emergency management, which came out a long time ago, and it was preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation. And that's still okay. If that's how they're going to organize, that's how they're going to organize. You may have local or you may have volunteer organizations that still use this. You may have some governmental organizations that still use this. So anyway, so you have to find out how they are organized. Now, right now, currently, we're organized around mission areas, and these are the ones. Prevention and protection, and those 2 are more terrorism related. And they included this because we used to have terrorism training on one side, and we had everybody else on the other side. So they pulled it all together. So the preparedness, though, is incorporated into all of the mission areas. So how does the system work? Okay, so the disaster occurs, local resources respond, fire, law enforcement, EMS. If they can handle it there, that's good. If not, local government and partners in local government assess the damage and is there a shortfall. If there is and it needs to be pushed up to the state, the jurisdiction's highest level official will declare a state of emergency. If that's because if they're going to push it up, they're going to do a state of emergency. And then they'll notify the state government of impacts. And then in our state, and all of you have some kind of a state emergency management agency. We call ours SEMA, but you may call it, I know what the rest of you are calling yours because I know what the, AKIMA and AIMA and NEMA. So anyway, but we call our SEMA here. So our SEMA would send a team to the local community to assist in a joint damage assessment. Governor would declare a state of emergency if it was bad enough. And then SEMA would notify our region, and all of us are under Region 7, Kansas City. They'd be notified. And then they would send a team to the affected county. And so it would be local, state, and federal would come in and go through the counties that had said, we need to have you come and look. And if it met the criteria, then FEMA would request a presidential declaration of disaster from the president. It's kind of a mouthful. And that PDD would list the programs that that are going to be requested. And then if that is approved, the state will begin the process of getting those programs activated in the system. Okay, so these are the assistance programs: public assistance, individual assistance, hazard mitigation, and I'm going to kind of fly past this so we can get to some of the other side. So public assistance summary, there's more than just this that are included, but this is just a kind of a beginning list of who might request public assistance. So, we have roads and bridges, and most of the time it's roads and bridges and, things like that we're trying to repair so we can get commerce continuing to go through. These programs are authorized through the Stafford Act. Individual assistance. This is for individuals, families, and businesses. And sometimes we get these, sometimes we don't. The unemployment benefits that are listed there are disaster related. If you can't get to your job because something stopped you from going there, that's associated with a disaster. Those unemployment benefits could be available to you. Hazard mitigation, we usually don't talk much about this, but we should. Every county, at least in Missouri, and I'm sure probably in your other states as well, need to have a hazard mitigation plan. And it's to how are we going to reduce whatever issues that we have so that we don't have as much damage the next time something comes along. And sometimes this money is available through if there is a presidential declaration. Then we get into small business. And that offers disaster assistance in the form of low interest loans to businesses, renters, and homeowners. So it's not just businesses as we normally think of. Covers physical losses and economic injury. And sometimes, and we have found this out in Missouri, that sometimes an SBA disaster declaration is the only federal declaration that a jurisdiction can qualify for. National Flood Insurance Program. Last but not least, I can't go past this without mentioning something about the National Flood Insurance Program. It is vitally important that communities are involved in a part of the National Flood Insurance Program. Flood insurance is available to all homeowners, even those who don't live in the flood zone. Business owners and renters, again, who would think. Most homeowners insurance does not cover flood damage. And I've contacted our person at the Department of Insurance several times, and that's exactly right. So I would ask all of you to check your policies. I would imagine that all of you will say it's not covered. So each one of you should have an NFIP administrator, and so you can contact them and get more information, even have them do a webinar so that you're more fully aware of what you need to do. Okay, I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Frank, and he can continue on with the agriculture part of this.
Okay, we're switching gears a little bit now. We're going to talk about the agriculture disasters. I think that first bullet that I've got there is very important in that the home itself and the impacts to the family are covered by the regular emergency management programming. In other words, the FEMA program covers the home and the family portion. It's not a separate program. Everything else on the farm, for all practical purposes, is part of USDA programming, and and there are several programs out there that USDA has that will help with losses in that farm production, losses in production structures, and all those things that come along with that natural disaster. Agriculture is unique in disaster events, and quite often there may be more events in agriculture than there are in the general public, and they're unique in the fact that they usually cover a broad territory. Commonly, the things that trigger agricultural disasters are drought and disease. There can be some other stuff. And depending on how big the event is. And it's all about the plant and animal impacts. We're talking about farm production in these cases. Okay. Okay, how's the ag disaster get declared? Your state farm service agency has office somewhere central that ours is in Columbia, and the office collects weekly ag commodity production condition data. In other words, how are things going out on the farm? And that information is submitted by local agricultural professionals that are actually out there working with the farm community. Some of them may be farmers themselves, but we see agricultural specialists in extension, crop consultants, the FSA director, and perhaps NRCS soil conservationists and others that are submitting data to the FSA office for them to keep track of how things are going. When that data, let's go back. When that data indicates a significant impact, then the state office will ask for more details from those affected counties. And the county FSA director convenes the County Emergency Agricultural Board. And that board is usually made up of the FSA director, also the NRCS soil conservationist that serves the county, and the extension agricultural person. There may be others, but that's the main three. State FSA submits to USDA national office for the national support. And that's the last step that's made by the state until they start getting the declaration. Okay, go ahead. Gonna change gears again, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what I've done since the '93 flood in getting more active with the local emergency management program. You know, the things that we have to ask ourselves are, do we have something to offer? Do we have administration support? Do our bosses support our emergency management programming? That's key to getting your involvement really supported and really recognized. Have you introduced yourself to your local emergency management group? There are several people out there that are doing emergency management in your community, and they need to know you. So how do you do that? Okay. Here's just a quick things off the top of my head that I think extension personnel can provide to their local emergency management program. These are things that we are good at, And it's something that, and I'm sure that there's more to put on that list. But these are things that we can help our community with in the case of a disaster. Okay. In Missouri, we've got regional emergency management teams, emergency management professionals, the emergency management directors, the volunteer organizations, and other nonprofit organizations participate in a couple of different committees that are multi-county. And the Regional Homeland Security Oversight Committee is one of them. Regional Emergency Management Director Committee can be another. And you just have to check and see if those things are happening in your state too. Since FEMA organization is pretty much nationwide, I can't believe that Missouri is alone in that. So you guys need to kind of check on those things. There needs to be some contact made with those groups so that they become familiar with you and start to understand what we have to offer. Okay. Local committees that you can participate in and have them get to know you is the Local Emergency Planning Committee, LEPCs, Emergency Management Action Committee. That's in lieu of a LEPC, there's sometimes what we call EMACs. There's also community organizations active in disasters. And if you can only participate in one, that is the one. I think the other committees, I'd sure like to see participation by somebody in those other committees, but that COAD group is a local group that you need to have some participation in. We've actually got some multi-county committees here in Southeast Missouri that are COADs, and they are up to 4 counties in size. And if you're thinking like I was, working several counties, not having a committee in every county sure helped out. But that's an important one. Long-term recovery committee, that's one that started after the disaster ends. There's always some kind of cost to the community and cost to individuals that is not covered by any program. And that long-term recovery committee finds the funds and helps those folks out to get the full recovery. Local emergency planning districts are another part. That's the LEPDs. That's usually a multi-county group. Community emergency response team, that's the CERT teams. And if you Google search, you can find out more about those. But I think those are committees where those are teams where the instructors are providing information to help people be prepared for disasters and respond during disasters. So it's more of a preparation kind of instruction than anything else. And most of those teams could sure use a good extension influence to help their instructional techniques. But there is some training you go to ahead of time to let them know that you are there and serious about the business. Okay, go ahead. We always like to build those relationships before the disaster event. While the community is in stress of a current disaster, it's no time for you to walk up to your local emergency management director and say, "Hey, I'm from the University Extension. I'm here to help you." That just doesn't play well when they're up to their armpits and alligators taking care of other things. So you need to get to know the players, build trust with them, and share those strengths and opportunities that our organizations have to share. Okay. In order to kind of qualify for that, there is a minimal amount of training that is required. Everybody that's involved in emergency management, your county officials, state officials, everyone that might play a part in the disaster and the disaster recovery is needs to have some training, and those are available online in the independent study group, ICS 100, independent study 700, that's the NIMS program. Training recommendations are based on level of incident complexity. How much you want to play in the game will depend on how much training you want to take on. When I first started, there was actually 4 courses that were required. They just recently reduced it to those 2. Organizations have to adhere to any additional NIMS requirements that are passed down through local governing bodies. And so it depends on what role you want to play, just what kind of training you need. But everyone must have those 2 courses, and you can get those online. Go ahead. The first one listed here is the ICS 700. It's an introduction to the National Incident Management System. We're in love with those acronyms, so that's NIMS. And so NIMS 700 is one that just lets you know how the incident's going to be organized and how the national response is going to be organized. Okay, go ahead. ICS 100 is the incident command system, and it tells us how everybody is, how the local scene is going to be organized. There's an incident commander. For the most part, that's probably going to be the local emergency management director. He'll be directing the 3-ring circus that's going on during the disaster, and or assigning somebody to take his place when he needs some rest. Most disasters are a little longer than you want to take on all at once. We had a recent tornado. Well, it was a couple of years ago, and our public information officer pretty much stayed on duty the entire time that the incident was going on. We had pretty much everything cleaned up in about 2 weeks, but at the end of that 2 weeks, that person got terribly sick because they had just drained themselves. So it's important that you know how that incident command system works, and what all the players are doing, and be able to play your role if that should come up. Okay, go ahead. Here's some training sites, and of course this is going to be available to you if you want this presentation. You can these will be live links, and those things you got Homeland Security in Iowa. You got Kansas State program. SEMA training is listed there too. That's the Missouri one, and NEMA is the Nebraska one. And of course, you got the FEMA site there with the independent study. That's what the IS stands for. So go ahead. Okay, there's our contact information. I guess if you've got any questions, you can text them to us, use the chat to get to us, but we're here to help you out.
I believe we've got about 5 minutes left on our allotted time today. So if there's a burning question or two, thank you, Frank and Connie, for your presentations. I know that was a lot of information, and we try to handle a question or two at this point in time if there's somebody got a real burning question.
Yes, please go ahead and put that in the chat. And I wanted to let everyone know that if you have registered for this webinar, that is the easiest way for us to go ahead and send out the slides and all of the material from our presenters today. I have been told that not everyone who attended this morning did register. So unless you register, we don't actually have a way of collecting your email addresses. But we will be sharing all of the presentations and this recording to everyone who registered. Meredith has a question for Connie about NFIP.
It's going to be easier if I ask this
Go for it.
rather than type it out. So Connie, I have a client who gets flooded and they are not in a flood zone, what's been classified as a flood zone. They live in a community that's not really recognized as a community anymore because it's gotten so small. What can I do, or how can I help them before this next flood comes by? Because they've told me they cannot buy flood insurance because they're not in a flood zone.
Anybody, I think, can buy flood insurance, but it doesn't really make any difference if you're in one. I mean, I'm not in one either, and I could buy it. The situation is that the county may not be in the system because in order for an individual to buy flood insurance, you have to be in either the city or the county that has agreed to all of the requirements of the National Flood Insurance Program in their state. So the first thing I would find out is if that city is not recognized as a city anymore and they're just part of the county, is to find out if the county is in the National Flood Insurance Program. And if they are, then I would have to question why she was not able to buy insurance. But I mean, I can work through that or get you directed to our National Flood Insurance Program administrator very easily. But if you can find out first if the county's in it, and we can go online and get that, or I can work with you offline about that. But again, I've talked to him before, and it's like anybody can buy flood insurance as long as your county, or if you're in a city that has agreed to the requirements of the National Flood Insurance Program.
Okay.
Connie, can I just add to that? Because 2 days ago, I was in a meeting that insurances were discussing this, and they mentioned that if you are not in one of those areas that is labeled as flooding, is it 100 or 500 year, insurance companies don't want to work with you, even if you can buy it. They just
they would not. So they wouldn't sell
They
it?
push you away because it's too complex to do it for them.
Oh, well, that's interesting, because that's not usually the situation when I talk to the state and what they say about it. But
So
anyway, I'll bring that up.
it is available, but people just don't want to deal with it.
I gotcha. Okay. Well, if that's the case, then Meredith, you don't have, there's nothing that this person can do if the insurances are not going to, if they can't buy insurance.
You have to push.
I'll check it out. I'll check it out and find out. And Maria, thank you.
Thank you.
We've probably got time for one or two more questions, and then we'll wrap up for the day.
And as a reminder, that Jason provided a link in the chat if you still need to register. That's how you'll get all of the materials. And also, because this is part of a nationally funded program, there will be an evaluation that is coming out so that we can document what worked well about this, what additional information can this project provide for people. So please look for that in your survey, in your emails, and please complete that survey.
So Mallory, do we have another question waiting?
Someone just asked, will folks be informed when more materials are put together?
Okay. Again, if you registered for the webinar, we've got a good way to contact you through email. If you're not registered, we don't know how to get a hold of you other than searching it out individually. So that's the key, again, is to make sure you got registered for the webinar today, and then we'll follow up with you. And
those EDEN websites are...
Yes, and then the websites that we listed in the presentation are also a way to access information. At this point, I think we probably need to wrap things up, and I would close by saying that I hope we have successfully conveyed to you the structure of the federal and state level emergency management systems, and that's where it begins to become localized, is once we get below that state level. So as Frank was conveying, that's when you need to make your local contacts and follow up with the local folks. I hope we've perked your interest in becoming involved in disaster management and response in your communities. You know, extension people are frontline resources, and we might as well get credit for it by being part of the formal structure. And then just a couple more announcements. We fully intend to continue with this project as we go forward, with or without some additional funding. We are funded through the fall of 2021, and in August or September of 2021, we are working towards having a face-to-face meeting of a emergency management team, if you will, from each of the 4 states. And at that point in time, we hope to be able to provide a whole lot more in-depth resources and some training for folks in a face-to-face format. And we also are looking to pursue ongoing funding to support the 4-state concept of the Heartland EDEN project. And I'd like to again thank everybody for joining in today and appreciate all of your input, and be looking for email from us. So thank you very much.